For example, the market return could be much less in the future. Inflation could skyrocket as well, for example. Our lifestyle costs might increase in the future when we retire. You don't have to wait until you reach financial independence to start enjoying your life. You can do that much earlier and start living a life that you love and that's true to you. Welcome to Freedom Before FI. Using FIRE and life design techniques, we help you create freedom on your way to FI instead of waiting until you're retired to do the things that light you up. I'm your host Greg, a FIRE movement and life design enthusiast. If you're itching to get freedom now, then let's do this. Hello and welcome back to the show. So we'll be continuing the topic on Coast FI. On the previous episode, we talked about how to actually achieve Coast FI on an average salary. So if you're considering Coast FI as your strategy, that's great. However, there are some downsides or pitfalls you do have to consider quite thoroughly, which is what I'll be discussing today. So I've got pitfalls to run through, and I'll also give you my thoughts on how to overcome them as well. Alright, let's dive right in. Okay, so downside number one is having no access or limited access to full-time work perks. Okay, so assuming your plan in Coast FI is to downshift from your full-time stressful career to a more chill part-time role, maybe going self-employed or even joining the gig economy, the one thing you may need to give up are those shiny full-timer role perks. If you're not living in a country that provides free healthcare, one of the biggest of those perks could be healthcare and dental coverage, obviously depending on the company policy. Other cool perks might be things like childcare costs, gym memberships, training and development, travel expenses, life insurance, etc. So in order to overcome this, you'd have to select what particular perks actually were of value to you. Then you just have to obtain them on a DIY basis before heading into Coast FI. You'll then just have to include them as an expense item in your budget during your coasting phase. When my wife and I went on a 16-month sabbatical, we figured that healthcare coverage was quite important, especially since we were traveling at the time and doing crazy stuff like jumping off waterfall cliffs, exploring on motorbikes. So we shopped around for individual healthcare coverage which covered a certain amount of health bills, checkups, and included some limited dental costs too. We just had to include this in our budget. It just became another expense item we had to account for in our monthly expenses, alongside groceries, travel, and what have you. So again, figure out what specific perks you'll need and just get them individually. You might find that you don't need some of those perks you were used to. Like instead of gym memberships, perhaps you can work out at home or run around nearby open spaces. And instead of getting life insurance from work, sometimes there are other ways to obtain it. In Philippines, for example, you can get free life insurance if you open certain bank accounts or credit cards. You just have to be a bit creative. Okay, so the second downside is it might be hard to find part-time work. As mentioned earlier, one of the more enticing options available when you reach Coast FI is the ability to downshift to either a less stressful role for less money or reduce your hours to a more part-time role. Now this might sound awesome in theory, but how many part-time roles are actually out there? And if they are out there, how many people do you think would be applying for them? Quite a lot, I'd have thought. Now if you want to look for a less stressful role that pays less, perhaps you might not have the specific experience the employer is after, since you've built your career in another industry or sector. Or the reverse might be the case. Maybe you're overqualified for the role. Now you might be lucky enough to have a career that can naturally transition to a part-time role or have the transferable skills to switch over to a lower stress job. But what can you do if you don't? To overcome this, you need to do a lot of prep work before pulling the trigger to Coast FI. And I think it's vitally important to have some specific job ideas in mind, as you need to treat it like a career change leap. This will definitely include a lot of research about the skills and experience needed for the role. You might even be able to get some actual experience in the field by doing maybe internships or doing volunteering, or get some sort of work experience in some way, shape, or form. Also, check if there are any certifications or accreditations you can take that could help. Now, one of the biggest levers that can help here is your network. You might have heard of the term the hidden job market. And the vacancies in the hidden job market are not on LinkedIn or Indeed or on JobStreet, but you might find them amongst a circle of friends, contacts, colleagues. So I suggest to get networking in the field you aspire to jump into when coasting. And just remember to be of service to your new contacts as well. Offer to help them in their endeavours too. So if you've done all your prep work, you'd be in a much better position to find a role that suits you as well as your future employer. Okay, so the third downside is uncertain future market returns and living expenses. So when we calculate our Coast FI number, or any FI number at that, we usually use assumptions to estimate things like the duration to get to our target number. We make assumptions around the market return, inflation percentage, and future expenses. But herein lies the inherent problem with FI strategies. They're based on assumptions. But we need to do that in order to make some sensible projections, so we know how much we need to invest and what to aim for exactly. Of course, no one can predict future returns, but we use best guess estimates based on historic data. So naturally, the pitfall here is those assumptions could change in the future by some unforeseen circumstances affecting our plans. For example, the market return could be much less in the future. Inflation could skyrocket as well, for example. Our lifestyle costs might increase in the future when we retire. For example, expensive medication. Or you might feel the urge to splash out more on spa treatments in your older age. So how can we tackle this? So some suggestions we can do here is to initially have backup plans for when things do go south. We can also be more conservative with our projections. So instead of calculating 8% or more on our market returns, we can drop it to say 5 or 6%, inflation adjusted of course. We can also adjust our calculations to include slightly more expenses in retirement. Just remember, typical FI calculations like the 4% rule already have accounted for bear markets. I think the original Trinity study have accounted for those significant market downturns in the past. However, if you think you are already being overly conservative with your calculations, perhaps you can prepare some plan Bs in your back pocket if these situations do arise. For example, if a severe bear market comes around in the future and lasts, say, 3 to 4 years, which is way above the typical bear market duration, perhaps your plan B would be to go back to your full-time corporate gig and save and invest more. Maybe you could do your arbitrage and move to a country or city with a much lower cost of living during the bear market period. According to Vanguard, the average bull market period, i.e. a market increase of 20% or more, is under 7 years. Bear markets usually have a much shorter duration, and this is when the market drops below 20%. Again, according to Vanguard, the average bear market is around 15 months. One thing you can do is to revisit your FI number projections on an annual basis and tweak where necessary, especially if you foresee any of the main variables changing, like future expenses, market returns, inflation, and what have you. Okay, so before we wrap up, the last thing I want to mention is although we're talking about cons here, just remember the flip side could also occur. Market returns could be much higher than expected. You might find yourself spending less in the future. All of this just means you might be able to get to your FI target much sooner than expected. Anyway, that wraps up part 1. Stay tuned for part 2 on the next episode, where we'll be continuing our discussion on the downfalls of Coast FI and how to overcome them. Although on that episode, the downsides are more psychological in nature, and some would say those are more challenging. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If you need more help, you can check out our free guides and services on our website, freedombeforephi.com. If you have a burning question or just want to chat, don't hesitate to drop me an email at greg@freedombeforephi.com. If you found the show useful and want to be notified of future episodes, you can click follow on Spotify, Apple, or the app you're currently using right now. If you think the episode will help a friend or a colleague, feel free to share it with them. And lastly, if you learned just one good thing that will help you in your journey and you want to help us out, please do leave a 5-star rating on your podcast player app. That would help us out loads. Alright, have a great week and I'll catch you on the next one. And as always, practice gratitude, live life by your design, and do things that make you smile. You got this.